Do you like movies and television? Would you like to learn more about the magic behind the movies and learn how they get from the minds of the creators to the screen? Do you consider yourself a bit of a film buff and would like to know more without going back to school? Then this is the show for you. Mincing Movie Magic is a broadcast designed to stimulate your intellect and explore the minds of screenwriters, producers, directors, and others behind the scenes who create the real magic we see on the screen. Each week, you can listen to screenwriter and producer Tom Blomquist and professional magician Scott Wells as they discuss film and the magic that goes into every production. From time to time, they welcome friends from the movie industry to give other points of view that brought their visions to life on screen. This is Mincing Movie Magic. Please welcome Hollywood writer, producer, and director Tom Blomquist, along with your host, Scott Wells.
Good evening. This is Alistair Cook. Welcome to Masterpiece Theater. I know it sounds like that. Listen, thank you guys very much. I want to thank you for welcome you to this, our first episode. Last week, we tried something a little bit different by having this at the end of my virtual happy hour, Magic and Martini Thursday night. That was last week's episode 30, I believe. Tomorrow night will be episode 40. And at the end of that, we previewed what was going to be happening here tonight. And as the narrator had said to begin with, this he kind of explained what this is going to be about. And we hope that you will not only enjoy this and learn from it, but also participate. That's why we want you here tonight. So this way that you can type in your comments, your questions. And so I will encourage you to do that. In fact, I just want to say it right over here. Like I said, be sure to put in your comments and questions. So let us know who's going to be here so you can say hello. Then as well, I know I've got Mike Leary, who's here, who is a fraternity brother of ours as well. My guest, who is my actual partner, who's going to be co-hosting this with me, Tom Blomquist, better known as Sticks. I was known as Clutch Cargo, and my other buddy, Mike Leary over there, I know used to do commercials, advertising commercials, and he was Gump. After Gump Worsley, who was a hockey player, a whole other thing. Anyhow, I want to thank all of you guys very much for joining us here tonight. And it's not martinis and magic, but tonight is going to be a night for single malt. So I've got some Balvenie 12-year-old that is going to be cracked open here in a few moments. But before we do that, I want to tell you about this evening's episode, which we're going to be talking about adaptations. And start to talk about that is my buddy and yours. Please welcome this internationally known screenwriter, producer, and director from Hollywood. Please welcome Tom Blomquist. Hey there, Tom.
Hey, how are you, Clutch?
I'm doing great, Sticks. Good to see you, my friend. And I'm so glad. I'm really excited and happy to be doing this here with you tonight, because this is going to be something completely different. And I know that you have taught a class in this for a while. Hey, I've got friend Phil Camp. Hey, Phil, glad that you're here. Thanks again for joining. He's here in Houston, actually, as well. And as other people pop on, please let us know that you're here. You have been, I remember years ago, you had worked writing screenplays or being a screenwriter for the A-Team and Walker, Texas Ranger, and it goes on and on. You had one, you said, for the next generation of Star Trek, et cetera. We'll talk about that. But how many years and how long have you been doing adaptations, which is different than being a screenwriting is different than adaptations. Can you explain the difference?
It's part of being a screenwriter. Adaptations take all forms. In fact, when you write an episode of a TV show, you are adapting in many ways the previous episode. So if you go write an episode of Law and Order, you're not just making up a story and characters out of whole cloth. You are adapting the characters, the themes, the storytelling style of the original, and however it's progressed over the years. And all television and film writers do a lot of adaptation. Some of them are real obvious. You have a John Grisham novel and you're going to turn it into a movie. Some are less obvious. It may be a newspaper article, something in Rolling Stone magazine, or maybe a song, or a poem, or something that, a historical event. And you think, boy, that's really interesting, and you research it, and you're doing a version of adaptation when you do that. And there are kind of mandates and rules if you do it right, which we'll be talking about. But so in my case, when I was just trying to be a writer professional writer. One of the first things I ever worked on was the adaptation of Barbara Taylor Bradford's novel, A Woman of Substance, which was a best-selling book, very popular, and a producer I was working with in a non-writing capacity bought the rights to the book, and she had financing, and she was going to hire a screenwriter in England to write this, which I think was a 4-hour movie or a 6-hour movie, and they couldn't figure out how to take this kind of expansive, epic, historical novel, and turn it into what it needed to be. And so I took the crack at the outline, and so I'm credited as outline adaptation. I didn't write the script, but I wrote the outline, and I took that book and I broke it down, and I tried. So
is that you get screen credit and everything for that also, as far as outline script? Really? Okay.
Well, it's not an official Writers Guild credential, but I wasn't in the Writers Guild at that time, and it was a British production, so who cares? But that's outline adaptation is how I'm credited.
And then
in fact, that's what I did.
And then the screenwriter gets that outline, and then they kind of build on that.
Yeah, absolutely, because she had never done this before. She's a wonderful writer, but she had never taken on a project like this. And so I spent quite a bit of time breaking the book down, and I would do an outline. Scene 1, pages 5 through 32, and scene 2, and I would jump around in the book to try to make sense of it for a teleplay, to have it flow in the right ways and to have all the things happen. One of the things she wasn't familiar with as a screenwriter was act breaks and commercial breaks.
Oh,
and
yeah.
TV movies typically are written in 7 acts. Classic, as we talked about the other night, classic Aristotle dramatic structure is 3 acts, which still holds. But then you subdivide some of those to come up with 7, because you're going to have commercial breaks and you don't want it to come in right in the middle of the wrong scene. So you structure your story to have these peaks, and then a commercial break, and then another peak. And so in England, wherever they were running this, they didn't have that mandate, and she didn't really know how to do that. And I had an idea how to do it. So came up with how to do a 7-act structure for the US edited version, and however many acts it was, 3-act structure for the British version. It's still the same script, but you have to, have multiple structural breaks.
But does that have to do then with editing, actually? So you edit that together differently for different countries?
Well, when the movie's finished, they've shot it with these act breaks in the script. It says literally end of Act 4.
Okay.
Act 5, end of Act 5, 6. And so they shoot it that way, and then the editor will break it up into what we call delivery requirements, very mundane aspect of making movies, but you have delivery requirements. And whoever the British channel was, or whatever, whoever paid for it there, had their delivery requirements. We want it in these many acts, and that's how we want it. We want it in this format, this aspect ratio, all the things that they ask for. And then the same thing for the American distributor. Well, we want it this way. And so you are delivering different versions of a project all over the world, frankly. But you've got your UK requirements, the US requirements, and who knows who else had stuff. But in order to do that, you have to design a movie, or in this case, a miniseries, to be able to do all those things. You can't shoot a movie and then decide, well, let's go ahead and do act breaks. You need to have it designed, the dramatic flow, as you're shooting it, performing it, and editing it, that it has to work for different markets,
right,
for very real purposes.
And I know whenever you are adapting, as we were just saying, it could be adapted from a book. It could be adapted from a song. Let's say, like when we were talking the other day on the phone about the jumping off the Tallahatchie Bridge or something. You know, it could be a song that develops into a movie because it has a plot line. There are some things, obviously, that are adapted, and others, like as a writer, which you just completed, by the way, this book of Devious Thinking. We'll talk about that, about whether this could be something that we would read like a screenplay. But the idea,
$20 million, we could make that movie tonight. Let's go.
But my question is about things that are not out there. In other words, it's not a novel. It's not something. For an example, the A-Team. The A-Team TV show was not something that started off as a book or something. This was somebody's creation. So that's not an adaptation. That's something completely separate and perhaps for another night.
They made a movie later. They made a movie.
That's right.
Film. So Frank Lupo, the late Frank Lupo, who just passed away, and Steve Cannell, one of my mentors, created that show. And I had a chance to be a writer and producer on that. And so I came in and had to learn the show, the rhythms, the metabolism, if you will, of a show, how it works, why it works that way, and then you do best you can. But many years later, they decided to make the feature film with Liam Neeson and that crowd. And so somebody else, the studio, had to hire writers to adapt the A-Team series. And, well, what do you do? It's a 2-hour movie. It's a different animal. But it's based on something that was the #1 television show in the world for many years. You know, I still get residual checks from countries all over the place. They're still running it. And so the TV series. So
yeah, that's my son Sean's ringtone on the phone. In fact, still today.
Yeah, mine too. My ringtone. Mike posts a wonderful theme. Anyway, so the somebody had to adapt the A-Team. So you have your characters. You've got the backstory of the characters. You know who they are, why they're on the run from the military, all of the stuff that was in that series.
Right.
And then tell a new story and it could be a similar fashion as the series, but they're not doing the series. They're doing a movie. They're doing a new interpretation. So some diehard fans of the series did not care for the movie. Some people loved the movie. It was a very good movie, by the way. But
I just rewatched it again recently over the holidays. Yeah.
And there was some stuff in there that I think they did really well, and other stuff, you know, I wish they'd called me. I would have given them some advice on some things that were different. But the fact is, it was a really good movie, and they did a really good adaptation. And I know Steve Cannell and Frank Lupo flew to Vancouver, and they visited the set. You know, they had some input on the script, so they wouldn't go too far afield. But you know, they were credited as producers of some kind on it, but they didn't actually make the movie. A studio and a whole new creative team made that movie.
But likewise, when you're trying to keep true to the creator, when you worked on The Next Generation, you were trying to keep true to the concept that Gene Roddenberry had for the series of Star Trek. So you kind of have to get into, as a screenwriter, I think you have to get into the mind of the author if you're not the author in order to adapt that.
Writers are chameleons. I mean, I used to say to my students at Cal State Long Beach and the American Film Institute that when you're a writer, you're not just a writer, you're a tailor. And what do you mean you're a tailor? Well, you have a little tailor shop on the corner, and some guy walks into your office and your shop and says, "I want you to make me a suit." You go, "Well, I know how to make a suit. What kind of suit would you like?" And the guy said, "Well, I want one sleeve shorter than the other, and I want it made out of I want the pants made out of really scratchy burlap, and I want the zipper on the side, and I want the legs sewn shut." And you go, "Well, sir, yeah, I'm sorry, but are you sure you want that suit?" Said, "It's my money. Make me that suit."
Yeah.
The writer's job is the tailor's job, which is you can either kick them out, say sorry, or you say, "I'll do the best I can with your parameters, with your specs." You make the suit. The guy comes back and he puts it on. "Why'd you sew the legs shut? And what do you mean the zipper's over here? And this is the scratchiest material I've ever." "Well, sir, that's what you asked for." "I don't care what I asked for. I hate it. Change it." That's what writers do.
Wow.
All across the universe. Trust me. any writer, you can talk to Stephen King tonight, call him up. This is what writers do.
Don't tempt me. I'll call him right now.
I know you will. A couple more glasses of that scotch and you might. And by the way, here's to you, Fletch.
Cheers, my friend.
But that's what writers do. That's the job of being a writer. And it's different, by the way. I'll just simply say, a novelist, people read their favorite novel and they go, oh my God, that's the best book ever. I can't wait to see that movie. And then they see the movie and they're disappointed. They didn't, that's not the book. The book was better, they say. Well, the book was fulfilling in many ways because it's a really good book. Movies have to be fulfilling, but in different ways, because it's not a book, it's a movie. And there's a million reasons why they change. We can talk about some of that. But in the process of that, the novelist is the studio, the actor, the directors. The novelist is the primary creative force. He or she do the book the way they want to do it, and that's their vision. Well, a screenwriter hired to adapt that book is not the primary creative person. They're the first creative person in the food chain, but there's a producer that hired them, or a studio, and then eventually they hire a director. They've got ideas, they want changes, they do this, and now you become a tailor. Well, this is how I saw the movie of this really cool book that I've had since I was 10, and I love it, and this is my dream project. Yeah, we don't care what you want. This is the way we're going to do the book. Do you want to do it, or should we replace you?
Right.
And there are rules, in the Writers Guild of America, but basically you get 2 or 3 passes at something to meet their needs, the people that are paying you, and then they can replace you, or maybe the director is also a writer.
So contractually, they have to give you a couple of drafts before they say, no, you're not cutting it, we're going somewhere else. Okay.
And so sometimes you'll see, based on a novel written by 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
And you see that all the time. If the word "and" is between the 2 names, Scott Wells and Tom Blomquist, that means we worked as a team.
Oh.
I mean, that means we were not a team. If it's an ampersand between our names, then it means we worked as a team. So you can kind of look at the credits and to see who worked as a team and who came in later. And this is all adjudicated by the Writers Guild, by the way. I've done many of these arbitrations where 4 writers and a novelist are all saying, well, that guy ruined it, and it's my work, and I want, because your residuals and your career arc benefits are based on whose name is on the screen. So people are all fighting for screen credit all the time. And as an arbiter, you have to read the source material, we call it, whatever the thing was based on, and then you read all the outlines that the different writers turned in, then you read the different drafts, then you read the shooting draft, and you have to try to figure out what percentage of this end product, the shooting draft, even if you hate that's what the one they ended up with. And your job is to kind of figure out who contributed the most percentage-wise in order to even get, or who had enough percentage contribution to even get a credit, and whose work is it primarily. If somebody just goes in and changes all the character names, well, that doesn't, you're not supposed to get credit for that.
Right.
But if you start moving structural things and changing the story and really
makes a big difference. Right.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference.
What's the difference between actually the screenwriting and actually writing a novel? I mean, you've done a little bit of both, and I would think when you're writing a novel, you really don't care. You don't have anybody over you, I assume, as opposed to screenwriting, as what you just said there.
Well, it's a different craft skill, novel writing, from screenwriting. So a novelist.
Novels don't always translate easily to a screenplay, correct?
No, and usually they don't. I mean, how many times have we all gone to see a movie and we were kind of disappointed?
Right.
Because those choices had to be made, and I'll explain why in a second. But just the basic, you think about what a novelist does. And a novelist is living in the internal world of the character. How they think, how they feel. They can reflect pages and pages of reflection about they walk into a room and the smell of the room reminds them of something when they were 10 years old, and you go, it's all in their head. It's not actually dramatized like in a movie. In a movie, you primarily are dealing with the action of a piece, the dialogue of a piece. In novels, you can do a whole novel with just what a character's thinking, and almost no one talks to anybody. So there is a huge difference. The other thing is, you have a novel that's, my novels are 250, 300 pages long. Novels can be 4, 5, 6, 800 pages, single spaced. A screenplay is about 100 to 120 pages, and not single spaced, because you don't have all the what we call scene description, but you don't have all that prose. You have, he walks in the bar, looks through the smoky haze, and sees the girl of his dreams sitting at the end of the bar.
Yeah, out of 125 pages, you don't have a lot of scripting.
No, but that's
a lot of lines.
Is in a screenplay. In a novel, you could do 5 pages on that.
Yeah. Remembering
the girl, she reminded him of his first love in the bar, and his feet sticking to the floor as he walks across the beard-stained wood. And, you can do all that stuff is great, and that's what makes novels novels.
Right.
But you have to get rid of most of that and cut to what is the central purpose of that scene. Is it even necessary in the movie? Because you got 100 or 120 pages.
Right.
And if you can't just take a book and scrape away the scene descriptions and just call it a movie. A lot of what a novel accomplishes is accomplished through what a character thinks. Now I have to figure out as a writer, screenwriter, okay, this guy spent half this book thinking and reflecting and fearing things and whatever in his head. I have to put another character in here I have to give him somebody to talk to. That's why you have buddy movies. That's why you have,
antagonists.
Talk to his cat, anything, but you have to be able to express the things in screenplay form that a novel can do really beautifully just in someone's interior.
Well, also, I would think that an actor is going to be able to emote that of what several pages within a novel is trying to say. So you don't have to say those words, but it's just through their look in their eyes and everything. A quick question, by the way. We have a whole lot to cover here this evening, and bringing on a mutual friend of ours, Francis Ford Coppola. Just not to drop names, but my uncle Orson Welles had told me not to drop names. My son Sean had just asked about how much of the story must be true to say based on a true story.
Whatever you want. It's based on.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. It's not these are not documentaries. Those kind of stories, remember, they're not documented. The Crown is not a documentary about the royal family. There's a lot of stuff that's no doubt very true. I've read, and probably a lot of people watching this have, enjoyed the series, and they've looked, behind the scenes articles and stuff. A lot of it is hinged on historical events that have been documented, but there's a lot of speculation, and they condense things. They combine characters. They have to. It's not a documentary. No matter how authentic it looks and sounds, my wife and I watch that series. It's amazing. But is it real? No, it's a fictionalized thing. Here's another one. Historical fiction. Just, you think about, somebody does a movie about Custer's Last Stand.
Right.
Well, we weren't really there. We don't know what anybody actually said. We don't know what some of these people actually were like. There's some kind of historical accounts. They may be kind of dubious, maybe some articles. Maybe somebody wrote a kind of a scholarly biography. And you pull all these things together and you do your best to dramatize it. But it's historical fiction. It's not a documentary about Custer's Last Stand, because you have to take some license. You have to. There's no choice. You're going to tell that story. Spielberg did the Lincoln movie, wonderful movie. There's all kinds of dramatic license in there. It wasn't a documentary about Abraham Lincoln in the White House at all. It was great, but it wasn't real. It's still a pretend, let's put a play on in the barn kind of thing.
Right. Okay, there were a couple of things I want to bring in. I'm going to let you kind of lead this as to when you want to show this video, and also about whether you want to talk about the creative process or the rules of adaptations.
Well, let's. You mentioned Coppola, so I sent you that little video. It's available on YouTube, and if anybody wants to find it, it's Francis Coppola's notebook on The Godfather. And this is a wonderful little video. I think it was a behind the scenes thing on the DVD of The Godfather. But Francis Coppola met with Mario Puzo, the author of that wonderful novel, and they adapted together the book into the Godfather movie. And so it was an amazing novel. He was extremely loyal to it, but things had to change. But he was determined, as a very precise film director with a strong vision. He wanted to get it right. In the little video, it's just a short section of the whole video, but it'll show you the lengths to which somebody goes to get it right when they're doing an adaptation. Do you want to show that?
I'll start to roll the film here, but before I do, I want to just to mention that since this is going to be replayed, available later, you can watch this back on YouTube as well, and I recommend that you go to watch the full video, as Tom had just said.
Yeah, it's great. Amazing.
Yeah. But because of copyright laws, we may not be able to keep this on. So in other words, those of you who are here tonight get to watch this. And if you're watching this later and it's not in here, I recommend that you go and find it elsewhere. But we're going to play it now.
When I realized that I was actually going to make a movie out of the novel The Godfather, I sat down and began to read the book very, very carefully. And I think it's important to put your impressions down on the first reading, because those are the initial instincts about what you thought was good or what you didn't understand or what you thought was bad. And so I took the book and I actually wrote my comments right on the book itself. Interestingly, I decided to break down each section with these key criteria. This is a very big one because it was the wedding scene. One was synopsis, to synopsize that particular part of the book. A paragraph or two saying what up to there really had happened in terms of the story. Number two was the times, which is to say, how did what happened in the story at that point, how do the times bear on it? In this case, it was the 40s, so after World War II, America had a certain style.
What is it? Hey, my sister's wedding.
Every scene I was relating it to the period. So when I then was told by Paramount that the movie was going to not be shot period, it was going to be contemporary shot, which is to say the 70s, in fact that we were going to shoot it in Kansas City, I really had a very hard time accepting that and made a big point that it had to be period. And I didn't even remember why I did, because obviously that was going to make the movie more expensive, which is not what they wanted at all. And it must have been because I had just gone through this vast, big, thick book writing notes as to why it had to be, what the 40s had to do with the story.
Wow, that's pretty insightful.
Well, and what he's saying there, first of all, it's one of the harsh realities of doing an adaptation is that the production demands are real. It's somebody else's money, and they get the final determination, even with somebody like Francis Coppola, of certain things that are going to happen. You're not doing it period 40s because we can't afford that. You're doing it present day, which is now a charming period for all of us in the 70s. But it was for him, it was a now contemporary movie. And as he said, it threw him because as the primary adapter, he was really hooked into the themes, the textures, the subtleties of this post-war era that the book was written in. And he had to be dissuaded of that to say, it's the same story with the same themes, the same things. And you can tell the same movie without all that extra expense of doing it in the 40s and 50s. So, but what he's describing there, what you saw that notebook. He took
huge,
every page. He physically removed every page from the binding of the book and put it in a notebook and put it in a what do you call it? A frame. And then he wrote everything that he wanted to, that was important, because the rules of doing an adaptation are, you must not abandon the meanings and the themes and the, what was the thing that made the book work for you and for whoever bought it?
That's one of the first things. Yeah, you were talking about the edit.
Right there. look at that. You're right, Johnny, on the spot. So, but there you go. You must not undermine the core meanings of the thing, the morals, the theme of the source material. And then you have to try to capture somehow on paper and then on film what it was that made it work, as long as you don't conflict with the first thing. You can't undermine. You can't do The Godfather and suddenly undermine the thematic meaning of that mob
the
thing.
original material, right?
Make it a comedy or something, and that's not an adaptation. And then the last thing is that there it is right there. So you can make whatever changes you need to for this new medium, as long as you don't change. They don't conflict with the first two rules. One of the things you have the opportunity to do is reimagine a project. You could take The Godfather and you could tell it in, the dome on Mars with a future colony as a futuristic story. The same thematic thread and characters and a dynasty of villains and whatever and conflicts of people. So, you could take, Romeo and Juliet, and you can play it in the present day, which is Leo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, and you can, they're in the ghetto of Los Angeles, but they're still speaking Elizabethan dialogue. That's reimagining the source material while still showing fidelity. Fidelity is a big part of adaptation. It doesn't mean you're literally doing the same thing as the book. It means that what was important in the book has been honored and preserved. Other stuff can change, and so that's what Coppola's talking about there. And to do that, you saw him analyzing that material. I mean,
right?
Analysis. That I used to show that to my directing students at the university, who sometimes want to just go out and shoot stuff, and then they don't really want to do.
He said, "Let's just go out with the camera, ready to shoot." And you said, "No, you got to actually, yeah."
Well, exactly, and it's like, no, the hard part. It's relatively easy to shoot these things. The hard part is the planning, the writing, the honing, the shaping, the turning of whatever vision somebody has into an attainable project. Then you go out, and the fun part, and relatively easy. I don't mean to minimize shooting stuff, but I mean, you spend months and months, maybe years, adapting this, getting it ready. Then the producers start getting them on board. And they do production schedules and budgets and how are we going to do this and special effects. And I mean, it takes, for a big movie like The Godfather, maybe years. And then you shoot it in a relatively few number of weeks or months. And if it's been really well prepared, then it's, not neurosurgery. It's very doable with the right creative team.
Yeah, it's not. It may not be rocket surgery. So, where is it that that adaptations can go wrong?
Well, the not understanding what made the source material really work. You read a book and you love it. You just love it.
For example, going back just a second, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought. This is on that same train, just another caboose, and that is of the, for an example, the A-Team. We were going back to that again. You said when we talked on the phone earlier, there were several clones. There were not spin-offs, but there were other shows that tried to be like that. And there are other TV shows currently they find a hit and they try to do something like that. Or there's a movie that's a hit and they try to do that. Why do some work and some don't? What is it? And does that go back again to the source material? You have to be true to it?
Well, you need to analyze. So you have to do a Coppola. You have to analyze the source material. In the case of the A-Team, there were many derivative shows that tried to capture this lightning in a bottle that Steve Cannell and Frank Lupo did with that show. And there was all these mercenary groups, and they were going to go out and fight crime. And the one thing they all, to a show, missed was the fact that the A-Team was a comedy.
Ah.
They were all about blowing things up and, Mission Impossible kind of, plotting. Actually, there was many years after the A-Team, I was in a meeting at CBS, and the head of the network, I finished a series, and he said, "Well, what's next for you?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, why don't you look at this project we did this pilot, and we don't know why it doesn't work. And we think there's still something here. They had to deal with a very big star and some good secondary actors. And so why don't you take a look at it? And I watched it, and it was an A-Team derivative. And it was so intense and so self-important and so just so it's serious. And well, that's why it didn't work. You guys tested this with market focus groups or something, and people don't like these characters. They're not having any fun. The A-Team guys had fun. They were on the run from the military for crimes they didn't commit. One of them was certifiably insane, howling at Murdoch. And Mr. T hated him, and he was a caricature, larger than life kind of guy in real life and as a character. And so you have all these, it was beautifully put together, but it was a comedy. The repartee, the banter between these guys never let up, even when they were under the most dire circumstances.
Very comic bookish.
Yeah, it was very much so. And the people that tried to emulate it with these, 4 CIA guys and a Navy SEAL, and they're gonna be the Delta Force kind of group, and they're gonna go. That's not the A-Team. If you want to try to capture why that worked, maybe you should really study the show first.
Interesting.
And by the way, my only complaint about the movie was that I felt they missed on Murdoch. He was goofy and he was kind of crazy-ish, but Dwight Schultz, who played him in the series, was a brilliant actor. And we all knew that Murdoch was certifiably insane as a character. He wasn't pretending to be insane. He actually was insane. So if he had an invisible dog in an episode, all probably very politically incorrect now. But the fact is, we did an episode that Terry Nelson wrote where he thought he was Frank Sinatra. And he's singing these Frank Sinatra songs, and he had the hat and the swagger, and he was in a mental hospital, but they all thought he was Frank Sinatra. He wasn't pretending that he thought he was Frank. He actually thought he was Frank Sinatra, and then the A-Team utilized that quirk that week to make their plan work. And I felt the cast was great, but I just feel that they missed nailing the character of Murdoch, who, in my view, when I wrote the A-Team, I wrote an episode as a freelance writer, and then I came on for the last season as a producer. And when I watched that, and I had watched it just as a viewer because it was a fun show and everybody was watching it and blowing things up, and who don't like that stuff? It was great. But the fact is that this guy really was the center of the show. It wasn't George Papard, and it wasn't Face Man. It was this crazy guy and how he annoyed Mr. T that seemed to be the motor drive of the show for me. And I think we didn't quite nail that in the movie like they maybe could have. But otherwise, the movie was awesome, and they had a huge budget, and they just did spectacular action sequences, and they got all the banter between the guys pretty right. But it just kind of missed I thought that one element. And that's an adaptation thing, and it's a choice, and it's, Monday morning quarterbacking on my part, because I had nothing to do with that movie. But I had students run up to me, "Oh my God, did you see the movie? It was great. It's great." Well, I looked at it, and it's a good movie. But, ooh, man, just that one little thing.
Well, they did take him out of as I recall, I thought he was in a nut house, loony bin, mental institution of some sort, and they brought him out of that. So they talked about that at least, for the movie. But
it has to, in his case, in Murdoch's case, they had to break him out of the mental hospital, or he would escape every week. And it's not just enough to do that. It's got to be more organic to the story that he really is a damaged guy, and harmless, but lovable, but still living on another reality plane, a completely different reality plane. And once you fully understand that as a writer, you can write that. And it was really fun to write. And Dwight Schultz was just an extraordinary actor, and he did things that I mean, if you were to go back and watch all those episodes and just study his performance, it's just amazing. But how do you adapt that with a different actor is really hard. It's not fair to the other actor.
I wanted to get into the creative process here as we for now, and this was one of the first things we were talking about. You want to address this?
Yep. Well, sure. So you have to analyze the source material. You really have to, for the empathy, the understanding of what's going on, because even if this is your favorite novel in the history of novels, your allegiance now has to be the movie as the adapter, not the novel. And so there are primary elements that have to be honored in whatever that source material is. And that's a little trickier. Then you got the concept. You have to filter out things that are not germane. You know, they may have been great in the novel, subplots, characters, all kinds of details, but you have to kind of hone it down. And you have to analyze the architecture of that source material and figure out what is the spine of this and how do I tell this story in these limited, on this smaller canvas, if you will, and get the message, keep the message alive. And I may have to combine characters, I may have to eliminate plots, but I still have to make sure that I've designed this to honor that. You know, and then you've got your structure. Then now you have to say, okay, well now I have to do a 3-act structure. Which is, you know, the novel was no doubt done with a 3-act structure, but now it's a different medium and you have to retool that somehow to do that, what we talked about last time. You know, Act 1 is the setting up of everything and establishing the problem and the characters, and then Act 2 is the attempt to, there it is, wow, look at you. But you got your Act 2 is the context of the dramatic thing. It's the attempt to solve the problem, what's called confrontation here. And then at the end of Act 2, there you think everything's going to be solved, and then everything goes to hell on everybody, and that's a big reversal, plot reversal, the oh shit moment, we call it. And then all is lost moment. And then Act 3, we recover from that, and then we actually solve it. And so you have to take whatever the novel had, and you pulled all the stuff out. You've identified the most essential core things, abandoning your, you know, undying love for that book. This is not a book, as I mentioned, you know, and then you have to write it. You have to bring to the page the stuff that is most important in the way that the audience will like. And you're not just taking the dialogue and from a novel page and putting it in screenplay form. The nature of book dialogue is different than film dialogue. Remember, in the novel, the character, we look, like he says, he walked in the room and saw Scott Wells on stage doing his magic act, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff about whether he likes Scott Wells or doesn't, and what he fears and what he doesn't fear, and watching the act and what he thinks about it, and then he goes up to Scott and talks to him. Well, all that mental stuff is gone. In the screenplay, it's, you know, fade in, magic club. Scott Wells is on stage and Tom approaches and they start talking. How do I get across what Tom is feeling? Well, how do I get across, if it's important, what Scott is feeling? It's got to be done in dialogue. And so to that extent, movies and TV shows are radio with pictures, because you can't be in the head of the character unless you're doing voiceover, which is an option. It's just not recommended. It's usually a last resort to have a character just drone on. And then I walked into the club and I saw Scott Wells, the famous magician, performing. Yeah, it might have to work, but it sure would be cool if I could devise a way to get the character in the club and talking to Scott and still somehow convey that other stuff that was really important in the novel, but do it in a new way, dramatically. And that's one way, and to answer your question, how some adaptations go wrong, that it's not easy. This is really hard to do technically. It's a technical magic trick to do that.
Because after writing, then you go into the production. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you got the production stuff. And we talked about that. It's like, okay, well, now we have reality check here. You know, we have to adapt our vision to the specifics and the reality of the film production. As a novelist, I get to play all the characters. I get to be the production designer. I get to be the cinematographer. I get to describe the lighting. I get to describe the costumes they're all wearing. I get to do everything. I'm the editor. I'm the composer. If there's music, mariachi music playing from a cab that's driving by in the street, I can put that in there and create the textures and the layers of the world of the story. In a screenplay, you don't do that. You might mention the mariachi music in passing in one line, but you don't want to use a page count on that stuff because you only have so many pages. And so the reality check, which is a splash of ice cold water on every writer that's ever lived, is this is great. We love your script. We can't afford this. You have to take 10 pages out of this, and you have to eliminate 4 speaking parts. And we can't go to Barcelona. We're going to shoot it in Toledo because we got to deal with a guy there. And suddenly you have to refigure out how to do the story that you love so much in this new format.
Well, that goes to a question I've got as far as why isn't it that the writer of the novel would be also the screenwriter? Because it seems like they have the vision, they know what they're going to be doing, and often that they're different. I mean, sometimes you might have Stephen King, who's the writer, and he also is the screenwriter for his movie. But oftentimes that's not the case.
Right. Well, first of all, it's a completely different set of skills. I'm a screenwriter, been doing it a long time, and I've now started writing novels. And it's a completely different set of muscles. I mean, yes, there's story structure and characters, and there's stuff like that are common. But now I have the opportunity to also direct it on the page in a way that no one would ever want me to do. In fact, they beat it out of you with a 2x4 when you start screenwriting. You start directing it on the page, and they go, get rid of that stuff. But as a novelist, it's not only your opportunity, it's your obligation. You are the world of the characters for the reader. And if you don't set it up and describe it and take them on a journey emotionally, physically, whatever, then you haven't done your job. And so it's a very different skill set. And many times authors will attempt to adapt their book, and then they have to bring in somebody who's an actual screenwriter to make that work. It'd be like somebody who's an Olympic sprinter, and then they say, well, you're an Olympic athlete, why don't you swim the half mile, whatever,
right.
100
right.
meters. Well, I'm not a swimmer. Well, yeah, but you're an athlete, you're in shape, you can do it. No, it's different. They're similar, but it's different.
Interesting. Good analogy.
And listen, for the very same reason some stage actors have trouble performing on camera.
That's a very good question. I was wondering about that. For an example, you do have a lot of people who are good on Broadway, but they don't make the transition to the film. For an example, I don't know, was Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music on Broadway? It seems like they'd use someone different there.
I don't think so. Well, look, I worked with Tyne Daly at one point, who's from Cagney and Lacey and Judging Amy and a bunch of shows. And she's a good friend and an extraordinary actress who was raised in the theater in New York. And one time we were on the set of doing a series called Christie, based on Catherine Marshall's novel, again, an adaptation. And I said, what's the difference for you? I mean, she's won a Tony on Broadway. She's won more Emmys in our culture than any other actress, I think, alive still to this day. And so, what is the difference for you as an actor going on Broadway, starring in something and doing a movie? She was in one of the Dirty Harry movies as his partner, or doing a TV show. She said, oh, that's easy. She said, stage is to tennis what movies are to ping pong, and television is to marbles. And I said, what do you mean? She said, when I'm on stage in the theater, I'm playing a big game of tennis. I'm hitting that ball with big arm strokes. So I got to get it across the net and at the other side of the court with precision and all that. And she said, in movies, it's more of a contained environment, and I don't have to play with the big arm strokes. Now I'm playing ping pong. Now it's not some arms, but a lot of wrist action. And when I'm in television, now it's a close-up medium. And now we're doing this. And she said, so now it's a game of marbles, little precise hitting the thing. She said, when I go on to these different platforms, that's how I approach my preparation, is that, okay, you're not playing tennis on this one. You're playing ping pong. And the techniques of acting in a confined space, you got your key light and you have to hit your mark, and you got to do all this precise technical stuff that camera actors have to do, which is very difficult. It takes a lot of training. She learned early on how to adapt to that. And in answer to your point, some people don't. Some people they have to project to the back row of the balcony in the theater. They do it better than anybody else on the planet. Right. But ask them to scale that down to a movie screen, or even more painful for them, a TV screen. You don't want to be screaming all your time. You ever watch a bad soap opera or whatever, and they're all screaming at each other all the time? That's just lazy acting, and they're playing tennis or even ping pong when they should be playing marbles, given where their performance is.
The confines of the screen.
And by the way, that takes me to another point about where it's an obligation of doing an adaptation, but it's where a lot of them go wrong as well, which is, who is this intended for? Who's the audience? You publish a book and it's going to find an audience, whatever. But now somebody bought it and they're making it. Who is this actually intended for demographically? Is it women 18 to 49? Is it women 35 to 50? Is it men? Is it families? Because you have to know who you're talking to in order to shape the way you write it and adapt it for that audience. And it may be different than the way it was written in the book. Patricia Green, who's a good friend of mine, is the one that figured out how to adapt Catherine Marshall's Christie, which we talked about the other night. And this is a wonderful book. It's been a bestseller twice, and it's very dense. It's a historical novel, not unlike the Barbara Taylor Bradford book I talked about earlier, and A Woman of Substance, but big, sprawling, dense, layers of technical, historical detail, plus a really strong emotional through line. Very spiritual book based on her mother's, it was a fictional version of her mother's actual life. And so all kinds of layers of obligations and complexities, and people had tried to adapt that book as a movie for many, many years, and they couldn't figure out how to do it. They always got it wrong, and studios never wanted to green light it. And somebody got it to Patricia Green, and they were going to do a TV pilot, and she figured it out and wrote an amazing pilot, which was the #1 rated movie, TV movie of the year in the United States on any network. And it became a series, and I had a chance to be a writer and then a producer on that. And she figured out how to adapt that. And a key factor was, who is this for? Who's the audience? What do they want to hear? What animates them as people? Those things are in the book. How do we translate those into a weekly product, which was on CBS at the time? And then later I got a chance to go back on the PAX network, wanted to do a miniseries sequel version of that. So I got to do an adaptation of the TV series, which in itself was an adaptation of the book. And that was really, I learned a lot about the book and the series being there, and was able to, I think with some success, bring those things to, and then wrap up the storylines and add some new things that I knew the fans of the book, diehard, loyal, fiercely dedicated fans, wanted to see, and hopefully the way they wanted to see it, so they would not be disappointed, because it's up, it's their show. They deserve to be happy.
Right. Well, as we start to reach the top of the hour over here, Professor, I wanted also then to get back to your books, which you have written, one of them being Silent Partners. And I think it was interesting, you actually had done the screenplay for your own promo. And so I'd like to roll that video.
Sure, and we can talk a little bit about that. Absolutely. I did a kind of a movie trailer of the book as a promotional device of the novel, but we can talk about that. And then,
is there any setup that you want to talk about?
Let it rip. Sure. Thank you.
Hollywood, California, the magical place where dreams come true. at least for some. But for UCLA medical student Zach Raskin, a most wonderful and improbable dream, a romance with a beautiful pop music star, quickly disintegrates into a nightmare, where innocence is corrupted and madness is reality. To survive, he must endure things that no one should ever experience, as he learns the hard way that sometimes love is deadly.
Music fans around the world are mourning the tragic death of singer-songwriter Nicole Branson last night.
The Los Angeles Medical Examiner has promised a full
Roy
investigation
Branson
into the sudden
была
death.
американский
medical student at
композитор
UCLA.
Ein UCLA-Medizinstudent und Teilzeitrettungssanitäter zweifelt die Befunde des
The shock and disbelief, sadness
Un
and
estudiante de
anger.
medicina de UCLA y paramédico a tiempo parcial en Los Ángeles está desafiando
Look, I don't know what's going on, okay? But someone's going to a whole lot of trouble to stop me from looking into Nicole Branson's death, so I'm... sorry, I gotta...
Raskin is wanted by the LAPD for questioning in the deaths of 3 people in Griffith Park. If you see him, proceed with caution.
Can't do this. Having you, not knowing the difference between reality and fantasy, and now all these rumors coming about how you died.
You deserve answers, and I want to give them to you, but I don't have them.
Can I ask you a personal question? Why did you pick me?
Contrary to popular belief, even people on magazine covers get lonely once in a while.
I know it's impossible. Nicole died in my arms, but somehow she's back. And now she needs my help.
Protect this house from the devil's contamination. And most of all, protect this man from the demons that have possessed the soul of Nicole Branson. Damn it, I said go! The Lord is not going to abandon you. Oh, merciful God, exorcise from this place this most unclean spirit. I command you to depart.
Everything in my life is falling apart. I know the truth.
I love you, Zach. I will always love you.
Silent Partners, a novel by Tom Blomquist, available at Amazon.com.
Now, see, that's great. That's something that obviously seems to be a book that would lend itself easily to a movie, wouldn't you say? To screenplay?
No, not easily.
Okay. Tell me why.
Well, because, and thank you, the book is very internal monologue. And this is a young medical student. He's going through a terrible ordeal. And it's very psychological. And he's not only is a medical student, second guessing things, using his medical knowledge. It's a forensic mystery, but he's going through things, and he's basically having like a breakdown, in the course of this thing. He's forced to actions that he never dreamt he would have to, press to the limits. And if somebody were to say, well, I like that book, let's make a movie out of it, I want to hire you to write it, it would be a real challenge for me, as well as I know the story, to apply these rules of adaptation, be faithful to what made the book work, that made someone might want to buy it and spend $20 million or so, $40 million making a movie, and then to try to translate all that mental stuff in his mind into movie dialogue and what is said and what's not said in scenes, as opposed to just having a voiceover, like Blade Runner or something, go throughout the movie, because it would be challenging. I'd love to do it. Somebody out there wants to buy a book, we're in. But it would be a real creative challenge. And I originally thought of this as a movie project and years ago, and couldn't quite figure out how would I do that, how would I do that. And then when I decided I wanted to write a novel a couple of years ago, this is what I started typing. And I realized, this is maybe supposed to be a novel. Now, if it's supposed to be a movie later, great. But the story that I needed to tell the story that unfolded before me was nothing like what I thought it was going to be when I thought it might be a movie project years and years ago. It's just deeper and more sophisticated, and all these new things, happened. So the adaptation part was fun because so I had my novel and I was going to shoot this trailer with hired these actors and put a crew together. And so I had to pick which scenes I thought would be most provocative for a trailer. Inevitably, in a movie, you have a whole movie and you can just pluck stuff out. Well, I didn't have a movie. It's just the book. So I adapted scenes from the book, wrote the whole scene out, adapted it as a screenplay type scene. And even though I knew I only needed 1 or 2 lines of dialogue, I promised the actors that if you do this with me, I'm not going to waste your time. I will edit the entire scene, every scene you're in, completely with music and effects and everything, and then you'll have that for your acting reel. I didn't want them to, even though they got some compensation for this, it wasn't worth their time. Tani, the lovely gal that plays the female lead, is a very successful model and actress in Los Angeles, and Will Sterling is a producer and an actor. They didn't need to come and do this, and they did it as a favor in many respects, but I wanted them to have something for their acting reels. And so but I was limited to the amount of time I could have with this crew, the budget of money I was willing to spend. It was my money, and the locations that were available. If you're going to be, you don't want to drive all the way across town and waste all that time. You want to shoot in rooms that are near each other and locations, so you can jump from one to the other and get it all done in a finite. I shot that in one day, that entire trailer. And so all the locations were within 100 yards of each other.
Oh, wow.
And we had it figured out like a
what order you want to do it. Yeah.
Army invading, Normandy Beach, how we're going to do this. And so we really hammered away at that to get that done in, actually I lied, one day plus the little piece where he was talking to being interviewed on camera, and then you hear the police siren and he runs off. That I actually did that one evening later because I needed to go to a different location, and happened to be 100 feet from the apartment where Will Sterling lived. I drove over there and we shot that, in a auto body shop or something parking lot. But everything else was done in one day for reasons of the production requirement and locations. Some of where those scenes are suggested to be are not exactly as they're described in the book. Who cares? The spirit of those scenes, and I hope what comes across as the dramatic, build of the book is evident, and that's an adaptation challenge all in and of itself.
A quick lesson just within a couple of minutes right there then too. Well, as we wrap up over here for this week, we're going to be talking about something again completely different than next week. And we'll also talk a little bit then about Devious Thinking, which is the new book, and how perhaps this can be adapted a little bit easier, as well as showing a trailer that I made for you to help promote that book next week.
You made 2 trailers and they're awesome, but the one I want you to show them is the one with the coin magic. It was wonderful. Very, very engaging. So we have to show that next time.
We'll show that then next time. That's right. And so I want to also acknowledge and thank my son, Nick Wells, for coming up with this idea of Mincing Movie Magic. We were looking around for different names, and apparently Movie Magic has already been taken. Cinemagic has been taken. But since we're going to be dissecting and deconstructing the behind the scenes to what is making movies magical, that's why I think Nick had the right idea there of calling it Mincing Movie Magic, kind of mincing this into little pieces. And that's what I think we've done a little bit here then this evening. Thank you, Tom, very much. Appreciate Sticks for being my guest. It's been delightful. And I want to invite everybody to please come back then next week, but equally important to please share this and tell other people about this as well. As you can tell, this is something completely different, nothing to do really with magic, but it has to do with movies. And if you are a film student or really interested in knowing what's happening, what happens to the movies and what makes this make you want to come to the movies, this is that's what this is about. And Sticks is really Tom is really somebody who is the best person to be talking to us. And in future weeks, we're going to be not only talking about a variety of different subjects, but he has guests we will be having on who are friends of his, who are in the movie business, of whether they're producers, directors, screenwriters, or actors in front of the screen.
Cinematographers, editors, composers. There's some people that have, one of the things you need to understand is that when you're a filmmaker, you don't have to be an expert at each one of those things. You just have to respect them so much that you find the best people and
for that job.
Communicate with them as intimately as you can to get the best product. And I am proud to say, of the 800 hours of network TV that I produced in my career, I've met some of the best people in the business, and hopefully we can have a few of them come by and share what they know.
Great. Good. And we look forward then to, again, having everybody back then next week, and along with your friends that you're going to be telling then as well. So I'm just going to say that's going to be all there is in the receiving. Cheers to you. Thanks very much again, Six. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Scott. Very much.
So until next week, that was Tom Blomquist. This is Scotty out from Mincing Movie Magic.
Thanks for being with us. Please join us again next time for Mincing Movie Magic.